In March of 1990, a fisherman called in a routine report from the base of Devil's Slide, said something metallic was poking up through the surf. Dispatch thought it might be an old wreck, maybe a tourist's car washed out by a landslide. But when they ran the plates, every voice on the radio went quiet. It wasn't just any car. It was a 1975 patrol unit. And it had been missing for 13 years. What came up out of the water that day didn't just belong to the Pacifica Police Department. It belonged to me. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury. And make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Jack Monroe. I've lived in Pacifica, California most of my life. Quiet town, ocean on one side, hills on the other. I joined the force when I was 22, figured I'd do my time, serve my neighbors, maybe coach Little League once the kids came. It was that kind of place teachers and mechanics lived side by side. No one locked their doors unless there was a storm warning. In 1977, I was already a few years into the job. My wife Laura had just made sergeant. First female patrol supervisor in the department's history. That badge meant the world to her. She ironed her shirts crisp every morning, boots, polished hair pulled back into that tight twist she never let fall out of place. She was damn good at the job, too sharp calm under pressure, never missed a detail. We worked opposite shifts, sometimes her on nights, me on days, but we made it work. Shared a modest 2-story out on Talbot Street. Had coffee in the mornings, made dinner plans, kept a small calendar of off days taped to the fridge with a smiley face sticker marking the nights we both had free. The night she disappeared was a Friday. I remember because I was home early and planning to surprise her with takeout and a rented movie. She kissed me on the cheek at 7:45 p.m., told me not to wait up. I still remember the smell of her shampoo as she walked out the door. She never came home. For a while, they said she ran, that maybe the job got to her, maybe she cracked. They ran a search, sure, but no trace of her car, no sign of a struggle, nothing on the radio, just gone. Eventually, they closed the file, labeled her missing possible desertion. After a year, people stopped asking, but I never moved on. I didn't remarry. I didn't leave town. I kept her toothbrush in the cup by the sink and her winter coat in the hall closet just in case. I'd go down to the cliffs sometimes, Devil's Slide walk the route she used to patrol, stare at the surf crashing against the rocks, trying to picture where she'd gone. And then came March 14th, 1990. I was home, just finished pouring a second cup of coffee. It was foggy that morning, thick and low, clinging to everything like a wet wool blanket. The radio cracked to life on the kitchen counter. A fisherman had spotted something metallic on the rocks at the base of Devil's Slide. Looked like an old police car, half buried. Dispatch was calling it a possible 1054. I froze mid-reach for my toast. I knew that stretch of road better than my own backyard. Knew every turn, every mile marker. And there hadn't been a patrol car missing from the department since I didn't finish my coffee. I grabbed my jacket and keys and radioed in. 9 minutes and 37 seconds later, I was at the cliff's edge, looking down at the surf. I couldn't see much, just twisted metal, something that used to be a roofline. The ocean had eaten the rest. Maria Estrada, Detective Maria. Back then, met me by the tape. She didn't say anything at first, just looked me in the eye and said, "You should prepare yourself." That's when I knew. Before the helicopter came, before they pulled anything up, before the plate was confirmed or the casing was found under the seat. I knew. And still part of me hoped I was wrong. But when they started lifting that wreck from the water, the past came with it. They got the car up just before noon. I was standing behind the caution tape with Marie watching the cables go taut as the Coast Guard helicopter hovered overhead. It came up slow, too slow, like the ocean didn't want to give it back. Water poured from the shattered windows, pieces of rusted metal flaking off in chunks. When they set it down on the gravel pad we'd cleared, the shape was barely recognizable. But I knew that car. The moment I saw the partial plate, The color of the old paint beneath the barnacles I knew. It was a 1975 Plymouth Fury, same as the one Laura drove. Same model, same year, same beat-up left fender from when a deer ran out in front of her on I-280. The forensics team moved in as soon as the rotors shut off, working with quiet efficiency. Cameras flashed. Evidence bags opened. I stayed back, hands in my jacket pockets, trying to keep from shaking. Not from the cold, though the wind off the cliffs cut sharp, but from something deeper. Something like dread, but heavier. Like I'd just stepped into a memory I never wanted to relive. They opened the driver's door, and it came off in the tech's hands. Hinges rusted clean through. Inside, the seats were collapsed, eaten away by salt and time. The dashboard had caved in. There were no remains, no bones, just decay and shadow. And then the first item came out, a flashlight long corroded. Then a citation book waterlogged and fused into a brick. And then the tech reached beneath the seat and pulled up a single brass casing. .40 caliber, he called. Same as department issue. Another tech called out from the rear, shining a light under the back seat. Blood. Degraded, but definitely blood. They popped the trunk. More traces. Fluorescent spray marked the stains. Marie stood beside me, jotting notes in her pad, her expression unreadable. I hadn't spoken in at least 10 minutes. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady. Richard Hensley showed up just as they started inventorying the contents. He walked in like he still owned the place, breezed past the tape with that same swagger he'd had since I joined the force. He was Laura's supervisor back then, mine too. Now he looked thicker, slower, but he still had that command presence. Marie gave him a quick rundown. His expression flickered when she said Laura's name. He looked at me, nodded like we were old friends, and said, "You shouldn't be here." I told him I was fine. I wasn't, but I said it anyway. One of the techs ran the VIN, confirmed it on the laptop. Laura's patrol unit. No room for doubt. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Hensley said when they mentioned blood and a casing. "That could be anyone's. We don't know what she was involved in. Could have been an altercation gone wrong." He glanced at me. "People surprise you, Jack. Sometimes they're not who we think." I said nothing, just looked at the car. Looked at the hole where the back seat used to be. That's where they'd found the worst of the blood. Marie stepped in, pushed past the speculation. "We'll run DNA. Do it right. No shortcuts." Hensley agreed. "Full resources," he said. "This is a potential homicide now." News vans started pulling up before we'd finished the sweep. Reporters swarmed the perimeter cameras, zooming in, microphones extended. One of them called out to me by name. I don't remember what I said at the podium, something about Laura's service, about doing this right. Marie pulled me away when they started shouting questions. I could see the wreck behind the tape, still dripping seawater into the gravel. The past finally dragged into daylight. They told me to go home. Take time. Hensley was gentle about it, even put a hand on my shoulder. Said I was too close. Marie backed him up. I knew they were right. Didn't mean I was going to listen. I told them I'd go through the old files at home. Said maybe we missed something back then. Hensley looked relieved. "Just don't go playing detective," he said. Marie walked me to my car. Told me they'd pull the duty logs from 77, the radio traffic, anything they could find. I nodded. Got in the car and drove home with the box already in my head. It was still where I'd left it, top shelf of my closet, marked E.L. Monroe, 1977, in black marker. I brought it down to my office, cleared a space on the floor, and started laying everything out. Personnel files, log books, witness statements, all of it. The last log entry from Laura was at 8:15 p.m. Routine traffic stop at mile marker 42 on Highway 1. No follow-up. No distress call. Nothing after that. Her partner that night, Officer Patricia Hriss, said Laura was in good spirits, mentioned catching the late movie on TV. Two civilians claimed they'd seen a cruiser along the highway but couldn't say who was inside. That was it. No strong leads, nothing suspicious. At the bottom of the page, I saw the name Carl Bowen, night shift supervisor. His signature on the logbook verifying entries. Carl had transferred to San Mateo County years back. I picked up the phone and called Marie, asked her to pull his contact. She said she would. Asked if I was headed to the station. I told her I'd be there soon, but instead I drove south. Back to Highway 1, back to the place she logged that last stop. The wind was coming in off the water, thick with salt and chill, same scrub grass, same empty stretch of road. I walked the shoulder, stood near the marker. The old industrial docks weren't far Moss Landing. We'd searched it back then. Turned up nothing. As I stood there, I heard tires crunching behind me. A patrol unit slowed, pulled over. Carl Bowen leaned out the driver's side window. Still wore the uniform like it was sewn onto him. Jack Monroe. That you? We hadn't seen each other in years. I told him I was following up on the old logs. Asked if he remembered that night. He shrugged. 13 years ago, Jack. But yeah, I signed off. Everything looked normal. He shifted in his seat. Said he was on shift in San Pedro Valley today. Offered to grab coffee sometime. Told me to call him at the department. I got back in my car and turned on the radio. They were replaying my statement from earlier. My own voice came through the speakers talking about Laura's dedication, her promotion, how she never came home. And then a thought hit me. Cold, clean final. She'd just been promoted. A young woman in a department full of old-school men. She'd taken a supervisor slot some of them thought should have gone to someone else, someone more fitting, and she'd been assigned solo patrol on a Friday night in a remote sector against department protocol. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. The farther I drove, the clearer it became this hadn't been bad luck. Somebody made a decision, and that decision led to a patrol car at the bottom of a cliff. When I pulled into the station lot, I saw Hensley outside pacing, phone to his ear, voice sharp and clipped. Car came up. Your job. Move now. I stayed back, watched from a distance. He saw me startled, then forced a smile. Said the call was about evidence transport. Something about EPA regulations, saltwater corrosion. He was sweating despite the cool breeze. I didn't challenge it, just followed him inside. Marie was at her desk, hunched over a file with the forensics team. They were talking about DNA degradation, how the samples were contaminated, how long the results might take. Weeks, maybe months. Nothing immediate. But the casing that was department issue. Same batch, same grain, same manufacturer. It could have been Laura's gun. It could have been used against her. There were too many gaps, too much silence. I told Marie I'd run into Carl at the highway. She looked up sharply. Same patrol route, she asked. Same one, I said. She told me to talk to Hensley, then come back. There was something she needed to show me. I found him in his office, shoving something into a drawer and tossing back a glass of water. Blood pressure meds, he said, like I'd asked. I told him I wanted a full picture. Asked about Carl, about the logs, about the way things were handled that night. He got defensive fast, told me I was chasing ghosts, that people make assumptions when they're grieving. I left him there too rattled to hide it. And when I got back to Marie, she held out a document she'd found buried in the wrong file. It was a witness statement. No signature, no stamp. Just typed words describing a patrol car and a white van parked on Devil's Slide Road the night Laura vanished. The name at the bottom was Belinda Carlson. Marie pulled the official version. Same woman, same night, but this time Belinda claimed she saw nothing. 2 statements. 2 versions of the truth. I checked the contact info. She still lived local. Fairmont neighborhood. Marie grabbed her keys. Let's go, she said. This woman's got something to tell us. but as we pulled up to the house, we saw something that made us stop cold. Richard Hensley was already there on Belinda Carlson's porch, and he wasn't there to say hello. We parked 3 houses down and watched as he pressed a thick envelope into her hands. She flinched, backed toward her door, and Richard turned and walked away. That was the moment I stopped wondering if this was personal. It was, and someone was still trying to keep it buried. We sat in Marie's car for a full minute after Richard drove away. The porch light above Belinda Carlson's door flickered once, then went dark. She was still standing there, envelope in hand, staring down the street like she was trying to decide whether to run or go inside. We waited until the light inside her front window turned on. Then Marie turned the key and we pulled up to the curb. The house was modest paint peeling around the eaves garden hose curled near the porch steps like it hadn't been moved in weeks. I knocked, not hard, but firm enough. The door cracked open almost immediately. Her face when she saw us wasn't surprise, it was resignation, like she'd already rehearsed this moment a dozen times in her mind. "What else do you people want?" she started, then caught herself. Her eyes flicked between our badges, then back to the envelope. "We're not here to make trouble," Marie said, voice steady. "Just need to talk about a statement you gave back in '77. Belinda hesitated. The hallway behind her was dim smells of coffee and motor oil hanging in the air. "I don't have anything to say," she said, hand tightening on the door. "We saw Hensley just now," I said. "On your porch. We saw what he gave you." That cracked something. Her shoulders dropped. She opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Fine, come in. But this is the last time." Her living room was neat, if a little worn around the edges. Family photos lined the shelf above the TV. Her parents, maybe a husband, a younger version of herself in Ranger green. She sat in a recliner, still clutching the envelope. Marie and I took the couch. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then she said it almost like an exhale. "I'm tired. Tired of carrying this around." Her voice caught. "I didn't ask for any of this." I leaned forward, kept my tone calm. "Then help us understand. Just tell us what happened." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she started talking. "I was a park ranger back then," she said. "San Pedro Valley. I was on the evening shift, same as usual. Drove in just after 8. On my way, I passed Devil's Slide, saw a patrol car pulled over on the shoulder. Female officer outside talking to the driver of a white van. Thought it looked routine, so I kept driving." Marie took out her notepad, but didn't interrupt. Later that night, Belinda continued around 10. I called my husband. Told him to meet me in the park. I know not exactly protocol, but it was a dead shift and I was lonely. We parked out near one of the upper trails. Woods were quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Around 11:30, we heard something. Not close, but loud enough to notice, like a scream or a shout. Wind carried it hard to say where it came from. She rubbed her hands together. He wanted to go check. We walked for a bit, but it's a big park. After 15 minutes, we gave up. Didn't think about it again until I was driving back to the station around 12:30. That's when I saw the van again. Same one. Pulling out of the park. "You're sure it was the same?" Marie asked. Belinda nodded. It had this dent in the back, crescent-shaped, right side, same paint color, same shape. I remember because I had to swerve around it. It was going slow. "Did you report it?" I asked. "Next morning. Soon as I heard a female officer had gone missing, I came down to the station, gave my statement, talked to someone at the desk. Hensley pulled me aside about halfway through. Said he needed to clarify a few things. Said what I'd seen might have been a coincidence and that I needed to think hard about what I was putting into writing." She reached for the envelope, opened the flap, and slid out a stack of folded bills. That was the first time, she said quietly. 3,000. Enough to make me stop talking. "He paid you," I said. It wasn't just the money, she answered, eyes glassy now. A week later, I got fired. My boss said someone filed a complaint, said I'd been using the park for personal activities. They couldn't prove it, but it was enough. No one else would hire me after that. I had bills. My dad got sick. Hensley kept showing up every few months with more envelopes. For my discretion, he said. I didn't see a way out. Marie kept her voice gentle. Would you be willing to make an official statement now? Help us build a case. Belinda shook her head. You don't understand. He knows something's happening. He came here today. I didn't call him. He just showed up. I talk now, I'm done. He'll bury me all over again. And I got no safety net this time. You wouldn't be alone, I said. Not anymore. Maybe she said, but her tone had flattened. But you don't get it. I'm a nobody. Disgraced park ranger, fired for misconduct. I talk it's my word against his. He's got 20 years of clean files and command badges. I've got an empty resume and a mechanic shop I can barely keep open. She stood the conversation clearly over. Find more. Bring something he can't explain away. Then I'll talk. But not before. Back in the car, Marie stared straight ahead. She's right. Her word won't be enough. Not for charges. Not for trial. I nodded, feeling that familiar weight in my chest again. But now we know. There was a van, a scream, and Richard's been covering it up since day one. I looked down at the notes Marie had taken. One line stuck out. She said the van came out of San Pedro Valley Park. Marie looked over. So did Carl Bowen. My pulse kicked up. That's what he said this morning. He was patrolling San Pedro. Same location, same timing. That's not a coincidence. She started the engine. Let's go see what Officer Bowen's really doing out there. San Pedro Valley stretched wide under the late afternoon sun. The hills were brushed gold, the eucalyptus trees swaying in long gusts of wind. We pulled into the main lot near the ranger station and immediately spotted two familiar vehicles. Richard's department-issued sedan and Carl's black and white cruiser, same plate I'd seen earlier. Marie tucked our car behind a cluster of overgrowth and a parked van. We stayed out of sight. From our position, we had a clear line of view through the trees. Moments later, Richard and Carl emerged from a trailhead about 50 yards away. Carl carried a shovel and a heavy gear bag. Richard had something wrapped in thick black plastic. They weren't talking loud, but their movements were tense, focused. Carl opened the trunk of his patrol car while Richard knelt beside the sedan, opened a wooden crate, and carefully set the black bag inside. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could read the urgency in their faces. Then Richard's voice carried just enough for the wind to catch pieces of it. You hear Monroe on the news? They pulled the car. Carl said something back, something low and dismissive, but Richard cut him off. Blood, bullet casings, new DNA testing. This isn't 1977 anymore. Carl shifted his stance, annoyed. It's been 13 years. That body's bones by now. Nobody's gonna find it. You better hope they don't. Richard snapped. They confirmed that blood is Laura's. It won't take long before someone starts digging. They'll ask about her body, about that van, about the logbooks. Carl said something I didn't catch, then turned toward his car and started loading the crate. Richard was breathing hard, bracing himself against the trunk. Carl looked back once. Where do I take it? He asked. Someplace I don't know about, Richard said. So, when they bring us in for polygraphs, you pass. Then Carl paused, nodded slowly. What about near those people, he said. You know our business partners. If anything ever happens, suspicion falls on them, not us. For a split second, Richard actually smiled. Now you're thinking. They shut their trunks and parted ways, Richard back toward town, Carl taking the north exit onto the coastal highway. Marie gave him a 30-second lead, then pulled out slowly behind him. She didn't speak for a long time. Neither did I. We just drove the air in the car thick with what we'd just witnessed. The weight of it all hadn't settled yet, but it was starting to. Whatever was in that bag, they'd gone into the woods to move it, and now they were trying to make it disappear again. But this time we were watching, and we weren't going to let it go. Not again. Carl stayed ahead of us the whole way, never speeding, never weaving, just cruising along the coastal highway like it was any other late afternoon patrol. The only difference was the crate in his trunk and the knowledge of what was likely inside it. Marie kept her hands steady on the wheel, letting enough distance build to avoid suspicion, but never losing sight of him. We didn't speak much. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't pull us deeper into the weight of what we'd just seen. Carl had helped move something from the woods, something Richard didn't want near Middle Peak anymore, and the way he'd handled that crate with care, with routine, that wasn't a first for him. That was experience. When he turned off into a fenced road near the Sharp Park water treatment facility, Marie pulled over and killed the engine behind a row of storage units. We stayed out of view, but close enough to track his movements through the fence line. The place was quiet. No foot traffic. No staff that we could see. Just old concrete tanks, chain-link fencing, and a lot of dead space behind the complex. Carl parked near a patch of overgrown brush at the back edge of the facility, a place nobody would bother checking unless they knew to look. He popped the trunk, grabbed the crate, then his shovel, and started walking toward the tall grass. I watched him disappear into the brush, the top of the shovel barely visible above the stalks as he moved further in. He didn't hesitate. He knew exactly where he was going. Marie and I followed on foot, moving slow and low along the fence line, then cutting through a break in the growth where the path thinned. We kept our distance, stopping just short of the clearing where he'd started to dig. The earth gave easily, and he worked fast. A few shovelfuls in, he paused, opened the crate, and upended the black plastic bag into the hole. It didn't unfold so much as collapse bones, scraps of faded fabric, something that might have been hair. He stood there for a second, just looking down, then reached in and pulled something out. It was small. He slipped it into his pocket without a second glance, then started covering the hole. My stomach turned, but I stayed focused. When he was done, he stepped back, scattered grass and debris over the site, and tamped it down with the heel of his boot. To the untrained eye, it would have looked untouched. But we saw it. All of it. Back at his car, Carl loaded the gear into his trunk again, brushed the dirt from his uniform, and climbed in. This time, instead of leaving the facility, he headed deeper in through a secondary access gate. We couldn't follow by foot without being seen, so we jogged back to the car and circled around the rear lot, parking behind a cluster of utility trailers. From there, we watched through binoculars as Carl's cruiser rolled up to an old shed near the rear fence line. The building looked abandoned, rusted siding windows, boarded with mismatched plywood. But he walked straight in. 5 minutes passed. Then he came back out carrying a package. Rectangular. Wrapped tight in brown paper and tape. I didn't have to guess what it was. Narcotics came packaged just like that. Bulk weight. No labels, no markings. Just product. Marie was already on the radio, voice low. She called dispatch for a quiet check on the facility, any known issues past complaints flagged properties. While she waited, I kept my eyes on the shed. That's when 2 more figures stepped out. Bigger men, unshaven, both in worn jackets, one with a cigarette tucked behind his ear. They weren't employees. They weren't pretending to be. And between them were 2 girls. Teenagers by the look of them. Maybe 16, maybe younger. They didn't speak. Just stared down at the ground as they were led toward Carl's cruiser. He opened the back door and motioned them in like it was just protocol. No resistance, no hesitation. They climbed in. Just like that. I felt my jaw tighten. Marie's hand was already back on the radio. She called it in suspected human trafficking narcotics officer involved. Named Carl Bowen and Richard Hensley as primary suspects. Backup ETA 5 minutes. We stayed low, stayed quiet, watching as Carl stood outside the patrol car talking with the 2 men. There was no tension in their body language, no hurry, just another afternoon delivery. Then a white van pulled up from around the back of the lot. Old, no rear windows, just like the one Belinda Carlson described. Everything was falling into place too neatly to ignore. Drugs, trafficking, a van like the one Laura pulled over 13 years ago, and Carl Bowen right in the center of it with his badge and his cruiser and 2 teenage girls in the back seat. Marie barely breathed. "Look how comfortable they are," she said under her breath. "This is routine for them, like clockwork." I nodded, watching as Carl moved his cruiser in front of the van. Looked like he was preparing to escort it out, lights off, engine ready. But that's when the sirens hit. From the front gate and the perimeter road, 3 marked units and a SWAT van rolling in tight. No sirens at first. Then one chirped. The security guard at the gate panicked and swung the fence wide open. The van driver slammed the brakes and raised both hands. Carl stepped out of his cruiser like he was surprised, trying to play it off. "What's going on?" he called out. "Nobody told me there was an op scheduled." Marie was already out of the car. She walked straight for him, cuffs in hand. "Save it," she said flatly. "We saw everything, from the woods to the shed. It's over." Carl tried to pivot, said the girls were witnesses, said they were buying drugs, gestured toward the brick of packaged narcotics on his seat. I stepped closer. "You buried human remains 30 minutes ago," I said. "Don't talk to me like I didn't watch you pocket a bone." His face went white. He didn't deny it. Didn't say a word after that. Marie read him his rights as SWAT swept the rest of the property. Within minutes more arrests followed. The 2 men from the shed, the van driver, the lab techs inside. I followed Marie toward the building. Inside, the smell hit first ammonia acetone heat. Classic meth lab setup. Glass tubing heating plates tanks. No corners cut. It was professional. Beyond the lab, we found more rooms, holding areas. Girls and women, some barely out of childhood, others with haunted eyes. Some had bruises. All looked terrified. A female officer moved among them, speaking softly in Spanish, assuring them they were safe. One woman older, maybe 30, pulled us aside. Said they'd been working the lab for years. Cleaning, packaging. But the young ones, she said they were for the customers, for police who helped. Monthly reward. I had to step outside. Air was sharp in my lungs. Everything we thought we knew about Laura's case, it was only a thread in something bigger, something organized, protected, and entirely built around silence. As the medics started processing victims, Marie came to my side. "We need to go back," she said. "That grave Carl dug before someone else tampers with it." We found an officer to accompany us and retraced our steps to the tall grass. The earth was still fresh. We uncovered the site, carefully shoveling layer by layer. Bones emerged first, then cloth, then what was unmistakably a human jaw. The remains were bagged, tagged, and transferred with care. When the last piece was sealed, I looked down at the flattened earth and whispered her name. Laura. I'd waited 13 years for a place to say it, for something to carry home. Back at the car, I remembered the other thread we couldn't lose, Belinda Carlson. Her statement tied everything together. She'd seen the van, the timing, and she'd been silenced the same way. Marie was already on the phone, told her Carl had been arrested, that we had evidence, that it was time. Belinda didn't hesitate. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Thank God," she said. "Yes. I'll come." Marie hung up and nodded. "We're sending a car. She's ready." The facility was still active behind us, lights flashing, arrests being processed, victims being led out one by one. But for the first time, I didn't feel helpless. I felt clarity. Laura's car had surfaced. So had the truth. And for the first time since 1977, the silence was finally breaking. Belinda arrived at the station under escort just after 8. She looked tired, but not unsure. Marie met her at the door and walked her through the process ID intake voluntary statement. All of it handled quietly, no press, no interruptions. I stayed back as she gave her statement. I didn't want to influence anything. We needed this clean. Her words filled in the cracks, timing locations, the original van sighting, and the shift in her testimony after Richard showed up with that first envelope. She didn't embellish. She didn't speculate. Just told the truth she'd been holding in for 13 years. When it was over, she stepped out of the interview room, eyes red but shoulders straighter. "You were right," she said. "It's easier to breathe with it out." I nodded, told her we'd make sure she had legal protection. Then she was gone, escorted home under watch until the DA could review her cooperation. Marie sat down across from me in the hallway afterward and rubbed her eyes. "It's starting to come together," she said. "But it's not enough yet. Not for trial. Not for full indictments. We still need one more thread to pull it all tight." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Carl said something back at the park. He mentioned those people, business partners. Said they could dump the body near them to throw off suspicion. Marie's brow furrowed. "Yeah, I remember that." She sat up a little. "You think there's more? I don't think this ends with Richard and Carl," I said. "Not if they had access to a van, a drug lab, and trafficked girls. Not if they were that confident for this long." She was quiet for a beat. "We need to look at everything again. Not just Laura's case, every case she was working before she disappeared." Marie and I spent the next several hours in the records room digging through Laura's old files. Her open cases, complaints she'd filed, even minor infractions she'd noted in her daily reports. Most of it was routine noise complaints, traffic citations, one domestic violence call that had already been resolved. But near the bottom of the stack, wedged between two unrelated theft reports, was a file that didn't belong. Wrong date, wrong case number. It was labeled as a residential burglary, but the contents didn't match. A typed page, no official stamp, no signature, just a plain witness account. It described a patrol car and a white van parked along Devil's Slide Road the night Laura vanished. Same time frame, same stretch of highway. I handed the page to Marie. She flipped through the actual burglary case it had been misfiled in. It had nothing to do with Laura. Different neighborhood, different month. "Someone hid this," she said. "Not destroyed, it just tucked it somewhere no one would look." I leaned over her shoulder. "Look at the name at the bottom, Belinda Carlson. It's another statement from her." Marie pulled up the official version from evidence. In that one, Belinda claimed she saw nothing unusual that night. But here, in this buried copy, she described seeing the van twice, once during the stop and once leaving the park around midnight. She told the truth once, Marie said quietly, and someone made sure it never saw daylight. She checked the metadata on the document, looked for initials. "Who filed this?" "No one," I said. "That's the point. It was never logged." She exhaled through her nose. Richard knew she'd seen something. That's why he leaned so hard on her. And whoever tucked this version away wanted it gone but not gone. Insurance, maybe. Or a contingency. She closed the folder. "Let's go." Back in her office, we spread out every log, every report, every dispatch recording we had. Looked for any calls that night that might have been rerouted. Anything that could have been delayed or overridden. At first, it was noise. Too many entries, too much clutter. But then I noticed something on the duty log from that night. A signature. Carl Bowen's. He'd signed off on Laura's route logs. Routine procedure, yes, but only the watch commander was supposed to do that. "He wasn't her supervisor," I said. "Richard was." Marie looked at the page. "Then why was Carl signing her logs?" "Because Richard wanted distance," I said. "He knew something was going to happen that night. He had Carl do it so it wouldn't trace back to him." She didn't argue, just sat back in her chair, lips tight, eyes scanning the page like it might still give up one more secret. We were about to wrap for the night when one of the forensic techs knocked on the door. He had a printout in his hand still warm from the machine. We finally got a viable DNA sample from the blood in the trunk, he said. Degraded, but we were able to isolate enough markers for a match. Lab confirmed it against Laura's old personnel file and hair sample. He handed it to me. It's hers. My fingers clenched around the paper. I didn't speak, just stared at the line that confirmed what I'd suspected from the moment I saw that car rise out of the ocean. Laura had been in it, wounded, maybe dead, and she'd been moved, transported, hidden. Marie placed a hand on the table beside me, not touching, but close. We've got blood. A witness, a cover-up, trafficking, drugs, and now a body. I nodded. But we still don't have the full picture. No, she said, but we've got a door, and it's open. Outside, the station was quiet again. The press hadn't gotten wind of the new developments yet. The chain of custody was clean, the evidence was mounting, and the silence we'd lived with for 13 years had started to tear. We were no longer asking if something happened. We were asking who made sure it did, and why. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Laura's file open in front of me, reading through it one more time. At the bottom of one of her last reports, she'd scribbled a note in the margin. Van seen near Moss Landing docks, follow-up needed. I stared at the ink. It wasn't a full sentence, just a fragment. But it was hers, and it told me exactly where to go next. The docks at Moss Landing were quiet when I got there, still in gray, the kind of fog that rolls in heavy and doesn't lift until late morning. I parked near the old bait shop where the wharf curves inland, a spot Laura and I used to stop for coffee before early patrols. Most of the boats bobbing in their slips were private rigs, crabbers, charter fishing outfits, maybe a retired trawler or two converted for storage. I walked the main plank out toward the far end, where a few industrial sheds sat tucked behind stacked lobster traps and rust-stained barrels. There was a trailer parked off to one side, sun-bleached and rusting but intact, the kind you don't notice unless you're looking for it. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Laura's note in that report was vague, just a sighting, maybe nothing. But after everything we'd uncovered, I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. I circled the trailer, keeping my steps quiet. On the back end, the siding had been reinforced with corrugated metal. The windows were blacked out, not tinted, painted. A heavy padlock hung from the main latch, new and shiny against the old frame. And just beneath it, barely visible in the grime, were faint tire tracks that didn't match the gravel pattern around them, recent, narrow, like something had been backed in, stayed a while, and rolled out. I stepped away and made a call. Marie picked up fast. I gave her the location and told her I wasn't going to touch anything yet. She said to wait for her, but not in the open. So I slipped behind the crab shack and kept watch. She got there 20 minutes later in an unmarked cruiser, pulled in slow and parked a few slips down from mine. We met at the rear of the trailer. She had a crowbar and a warrant in her hand, fast-tracked after a call to the judge we'd worked with since the bust at the water facility. No hesitation now. We pried the lock off together. The door gave a little resistance, then opened into darkness. It smelled like gasoline and damp wood. Inside, the air was stale and thick. The windows had been sealed from the inside to plywood screwed into the frames. A single bulb hung from a cord in the center, and when Marie flicked it on, the space came into view. There was a folding table along the wall, stained and scratched with rows of bagged items spread across it. IDs, Polaroids, old uniforms. Some of the pictures were of women, some of men. A few looked staged like surveillance. Others were rougher, candid, caught off guard. There was one of Laura. I recognized the shirt she wore the night she left for her shift. The date on the back said March 19th, 1977. Marie was quiet. She moved to the cabinet against the far wall and opened it slow. Inside were more crates, sealed, labeled, numbered. Some of them had initials written on top. LM, CB, DJ. Too many to count. I stepped back and looked around the room again. This wasn't just a dumping ground. It was storage. Organized. Maintained. Someone was keeping records here. Someone with a system. Marie was already taking pictures documenting every inch. She found a ledger in the drawer beneath the table. Handwritten entries, most of them coded, but a few had details: escort prep lab ready, drop zone cleaned. There were dollar amounts too. Some were large. Others just had check marks next to them. One entry stood out. March 18th, 1977. Pull from MP officer involved $4,000. We both knew what that meant. MP was Middle Peak. The date matched Laura's last shift, and whoever wrote that didn't think they'd need to hide it. Marie took a photo, then closed the book and looked at me. "This isn't just Pacifica," she said. "This operation, whoever ran it, used this whole coast. Maybe longer." I nodded, trying to keep my focus on the facts, not the weight of what we were uncovering. I walked back to the table and sifted through the IDs. One of them belonged to a girl named Miriam. I remembered that name, Miriam Delgado. Reported missing in '81. Her case was never solved. Her parents moved away 2 years later. Another card had a badge number 1 I didn't recognize. I wrote it down. When we stepped out of the trailer, the fog had started to lift. The air felt clearer, but I couldn't shake the smell of that room. Gasoline, bleach, time. Marie locked the door again, this time with evidence tape across the seam. Forensics would be there within the hour. She called it in. I just stood there for a moment, watching the water move. Nothing about this case was simple. Nothing ever had been. But standing there, I knew we were finally in the right place. Back at the station, the processing began. Every item tagged, cataloged, documented. The ledger was handed off to federal analysts. They'd seen similar formats in cross-border trafficking ops. It would take time to decode, but the links were already forming. There were other towns on the ledger, other names, other departments, and that badge number I'd copied down, it matched an officer out of Salinas. Retired in '82. Never charged, but suspected in multiple missing person cases. I called in a favor from a contact down there. Asked if he'd heard the name Richard Hensley come up in any old investigations. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Yeah, once. He showed up to consult on a narcotics raid, nothing major. But after that, 2 girls went missing. Thought it was a coincidence. Guess not. Guess." That night I sat in the dark again. Same chair, same kitchen. But this time I had something I hadn't in 13 years. Proof. Not just of what happened to Laura, but of the network that allowed it to happen. She'd found it first. She saw the edges, and they killed her for getting too close. But they didn't erase her. They didn't erase everything. Her note, her files, her last route, those details had survived. Quietly, waiting. And now that the light was finally reaching those corners, the people who thought they'd buried the truth were starting to surface too, one by one. I picked up the ledger again and read the entry from March 18th, then the next one, and the next, until I found a name I hadn't heard before, a nickname scrawled in ink but separate from the others. Micah. No last name, no rank. Just Micah, delivery failed, went rogue. The entry was dated 4 months after Laura vanished. I circled it, folded the page, and placed it beside her photo. Tomorrow I'd find him. The name Micah didn't come up in any formal department records, not under employees, not in case files, not even buried in the old narcotics task force logs where we expected some overlap. But Marie had the idea to check civilian contractors, those hired for transport surveillance tech evidence disposal. That's where we found him. Micah Atwood. registered as a sub-vendor under a shell company linked to a private security firm that had quietly dissolved in 1985. No criminal record, no known address, but one emergency contact listed from nearly 20 years ago, a woman named Doris Atwood Moss Landing. I drove out alone. Her house sat just outside town, tucked behind a grove of redwoods, gravel popping under the tires as I pulled up. White siding, fading trim porch swing moving slow in the breeze. Doris answered the door without hesitation. Mid-70s, maybe older, sharp eyes behind thick lenses. She didn't ask who I was, just looked me over, nodded once, and stepped aside. The inside of her home was clean but spare. No TV, no photos. Just books, a record player, and a single cross hanging over the dining room window. I told her my name, told her what I was investigating. Her hands didn't tremble. She just sat down, folded them in her lap, and said, "Micah's alive, but I don't know if he's free." She told me he'd started working odd jobs for county contractors around 82, mostly hauling equipment, sometimes working night watch on abandoned lots. She said he came home one day shaking, saying he saw something he wasn't meant to see. Wouldn't tell her what. Just packed a bag and said, if anything happens, don't call the police. That was July of 84. She hadn't seen him since, but letters came once or twice a year, always unsigned. One had a postmark from Oregon, another from upstate New York. They all ended the same way. She's still with me. Doris stood and crossed to a locked drawer. From it, she pulled a letter sealed in plastic, handed it over like she'd been waiting to do so for years. I opened it. No date, just one sentence in a familiar hand. She remembers your voice. And below that, a name. Lucia. My breath caught. I sat back hard in the chair. Lucia, I said out loud, barely above a whisper. That was Laura's middle name. A detail buried in her personnel file, never listed on the original reports. A name no one else would have used. Doris didn't react, just looked at me with a steady gaze. Whatever happened, she said Micah took someone he wasn't supposed to take, and he's been running ever since. Back at the station, I shared the letter with Marie. We had the forensics team compare the handwriting to Laura's case file. Partial match. And the envelope's postmark 6 months ago, somewhere in Humboldt County. That gave us a radius. Marie contacted the sheriff up there, asked for anything unusual in the past year, abandoned cabins, off-grid dwellings, sightings of a man traveling with a girl who didn't speak much, avoided daylight. We got a hit. A ranger had filed a complaint last fall about a man who refused to vacate a section of protected forest land. No ID, no weapons, just a quiet refusal. Said his name was Michael. The ranger had let it go. Said the man seemed scared, but not dangerous. Marie and I made the drive up 2 days later. Took 4 hours by back roads. We reached the ranger station by dusk, were escorted into the forest by 2 officers who'd patrolled the area since spring. The path wasn't marked. No trail. Just broken branches, boot prints in soft earth, and the quiet creak of pine above us. About 2 miles in, we saw the smoke, thin white curling above a cluster of rocks. Then the cabin's small handmade windows covered with tarp chimney made of river stone. A man stepped out as we approached. Gray in the beard, thin frame, eyes that didn't flinch when he saw the badges. "I'm not armed," he said, "but she's inside. Don't scare her." Marie and I entered slow. The girl sat on a cot near the back wall, wrapped in a quilt, pale hair pulled into a braid. Her eyes followed us but didn't move. She looked maybe 17, maybe younger. We gave our names. Micah stayed near the doorway. "She won't speak," he said. "Not at first. Sometimes she hums, sometimes she draws, but only if it's quiet." Marie crouched beside her, held out a photo of Laura. "Do you know this woman?" she asked. The girl's eyes didn't blink. Then, after a long pause, she nodded once. And in the faintest voice I've ever heard, she said, "She's my mom." I stepped back, hand against the wall. I didn't know what to feel. Relief, maybe. Grief, too. Because it meant Laura had survived that night. Long enough to give birth. Long enough to name her daughter. But not long enough to escape. Marie asked if she remembered anything else where they'd been kept, who hurt them, how they got out. But she just shook her head. Dark, she whispered. Always dark. Micah stepped in then. He looked at me, jaw tight. They kept them underground. 2 rooms. Concrete walls, no light. I found them by accident. Heard crying. Couldn't walk away. He said he broke the lock, carried the girl out, thought Laura was already gone. But when I came back, the room was empty. They'd moved her. Or worse. He said he waited for days, but no one returned. So he ran. Took the girl, changed names, moved town to town, never staying long. I thought someone would come looking, he said. But no one ever did. We called for a medical team. The girl didn't resist. Let them check her over quiet and still. Marie stayed with her while I stepped outside with Micah. I asked why he never told anyone. He said he tried once. Left an anonymous tip to the station back in '85. But Richard was still there, and someone must have intercepted it because 2 men showed up at his motel that same night. They didn't threaten me, he said. They threatened her. He pointed toward the cabin. So I disappeared. The sun had dropped low behind the trees by the time the team left with the girl. She didn't cry, just turned once in the ambulance, looked through the glass, and gave a small wave. Micah watched her go, then turned himself in without a word. Marie and I didn't say much on the way back. There wasn't anything to say yet. We had answers. But they weren't the ones we thought we'd find. And the truth still had one piece missing. The name Laura hadn't been cleared. Her death hadn't been confirmed, but her daughter was alive, and she remembered the dark. They kept the girl Lucia in a secured wing of Monterey General while a team from the Bureau came in to take her statement. She didn't speak much. Would nod yes or no, sometimes draw small shapes on the paper they gave her, but that was it. No outbursts, no fear, just a strange, watchful quiet. When they ran her prints against birth records, it came back Lucia Halbrook. Born March 15, 1984. Mother listed as Laura Halbrook. No father recorded. No record of birth at any hospital. It had been filed 6 months late through a county clerk's office 3 towns over. Same one Richard Hensley worked for part-time after his forced retirement. The pieces weren't just connected. They'd been curated, controlled, covered. Marie and I met with the federal agents that afternoon in a closed room. They asked for every file we had, and they had one request: bring Micah in for formal testimony. I told them he was already in holding, fully cooperative, but growing tired. He didn't trust the suits, wouldn't talk to anyone unless Marie or I were in the room. They agreed. The interview lasted 4 hours. Micah gave names, first names mostly, nicknames. Described the layout of the compound where he'd found Laura and Lucia. Said it wasn't a basement, it was a storm shelter reinforced beneath an old government building west of Hollister. Said there were 4 guards when he got there, all unarmed, all dressed like mechanics. The door wasn't locked from the outside. That part stuck with me. He said Laura was already injured when he arrived. Said she had blood on her forehead and couldn't speak. But when she saw him lift Lucia, she smiled. It was the last thing she did, he told us. Smile. Then close her eyes. He carried the baby out, waited for backup that never came, then saw headlights on the ridge and knew it wasn't help. So he vanished. Changed cars, used cash-cut ties. I asked him what happened to Laura's body. He said he didn't know. By the time he came back with a plan, the shelter had been emptied. No trace, just bleach and broken tiles. The Bureau dispatched a ground team to the location he described. Took them 2 days to get clearance. It was technically listed as a decommissioned state property owned by a private investor out of Phoenix. When they got inside, most of the walls had been ripped out. But the floor plan matched. And in the southwest corner, they found it. A sealed hatch, Industrial. Welded shut from the inside. It took hours to cut through. When they opened it, the air that came out was sour. Beneath the hatch was a single chamber about 15 feet wide. No windows, just old chains bolted to the walls and the remains of cot frames rusted through. There were carvings on the concrete initials, tally marks, and a single word scratched deep into the back wall. Lucia. DNA samples were taken from the cot, from the wall, from the drain in the corner. It'll take months to process. But they already knew. So did we. This was real. This happened. And someone let it. Micah was transferred to federal custody under protective status. Doris signed the paperwork to remain Lucia's guardian during the investigation, and Marie and I were pulled in to testify at a sealed grand jury hearing, one designed to determine how many former officers, judges, and city officials knew about this network, and how many had kept it running behind layers of shell firms, lost evidence, and threats. That hearing is still ongoing, but one name surfaced early: Richard Hensley. Turns out he didn't die in 1999 like the obituary claimed. That was a misdirection. Someone else's body buried under his name. His real whereabouts. A cabin on rented land upstate 20 miles from the Oregon border under a fake ID and a new face. The Bureau tracked him through bank transfers tied to a dummy company still cashing residual payments from the Hollister property. They moved fast. Caught him 2 towns over sitting in the back booth of a diner eating soup like nothing had changed. No resistance. No weapons. Just a long silence when they cuffed him. One of the agents told me later he asked only one question. Did the girl make it? They didn't answer. They didn't have to. He knew. Back at the station, I went through the old ledger again. The last entry before the shutdown was dated June 12, 1984. Final transfer failed. Inventory compromised. Liquidate remaining. There were initials beside it, RHMCBL. We knew RH. But the others, they're still out there. Micah said there were at least 3 sites operating along the coast: Pacific Grove, San Luis Obispo, and one near Eureka. The Bureau confirmed that the architecture in the Hollister site matched other black sites used during illegal narcotics testing in the early 70s. Government denial was already in motion, but the case had gone public. A journalist from Sacramento got wind of the sealed indictment, ran a piece on missing women and cold storage chambers being found in Monterey County. Didn't name names, but the phones started ringing anyway. The station filled with reporters. Some of them camped outside for days. Marie and I stayed off camera by choice. It wasn't about credit. It wasn't even about justice anymore. It was about the silence being broken. The ledger was no longer just a strange document. It was evidence of a system, and that system had cracks. We had enough for indictments, enough for arrests, but not yet enough for closure. That would take time. That would take truth, full truth. And the one person who still held that the one voice we hadn't fully heard was Lucia. She started speaking again 2 days after the indictment dropped. Not in full sentences, not stories, just fragments. The woman with the black gloves, the white room. My mother sang to me. Her drawings got clearer. One showed a tree broken at the top. Another showed a truck with a red door. Marie took a copy to the Bureau. It matched a vehicle seen in satellite footage near the Hollister compound, parked for hours, never reported. They're tracing its VIN now. Lucia may not remember everything, but what she does remember is starting to form a map. And in that map somewhere is the last piece, the place where Laura was taken, or buried, or held. We haven't found her yet. Not really. But we're close. Closer than we've ever been. The last time I saw Lucia was on a rainy morning in early spring. She was standing by the hospital garden jacket zipped to her chin, watching a sparrow pick through wet leaves. Doris stood a few feet behind her, just close enough to catch her if she wandered just far enough to let her feel free. Lucia didn't wave, but she knew I was there. She looked right at me, then turned back to the tree. I took that as her goodbye. After everything, after the indictments, the trials, the interviews, the press, there's not a clean ending to give you. Some of the men named in the ledger disappeared before they could be brought in. A few died of natural causes that didn't sit right. One turned up in a lake upstate with a weighted vest and no note. Others, like Richard Hensley, stood trial behind closed doors. He never confessed, never gave us names, but the evidence was enough. He'll never see another sunrise outside a federal wall. As for Laura, her body was never recovered. What we found in that storm chamber was blood strands of hair, pieces of her badge burned and buried beneath a loose floorboard. The lab confirmed the DNA. They gave us a case number, a death certificate. I signed it myself. It felt like betrayal, putting ink to a truth I didn't want. But she's gone. That much is real. Micah was granted a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. He's in a federal program now under another name in another state. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. I don't think I need to. He carried more guilt than most men could live with and still found a way to do something good. That doesn't make it right. But it matters. Marie transferred not long after, said she needed air that didn't taste like old files and ruined chances. We still talk here and there. Her voice sounds lighter now. I think she found something worth holding on to. I hope it lasts. Me. I stayed. I didn't retire. Not yet. There's still too much work to do. I don't chase glory anymore, and I don't wait for headlines. I show up. I listen. I read every cold case file twice, sometimes 3 times. Because if there's one thing this has taught me, it's that the answers don't shout. They whisper. And you have to be willing to stand in the quiet long enough to hear them. Lucia's living with Doris now up north under a guardianship order. She's in therapy homeschooling for now. I don't ask for updates. When she's ready, if she ever wants to find me, she knows where I am. Until then, I leave the porch light on. There's a drawer in my house I haven't touched since this ended. Inside is Laura's watch, the one they found near the shelter wall. Still ticking, scratched, smells faintly of bleach. I keep it wound. Not because I think she's coming back, but because it reminds me time doesn't stop for grief. It just keeps going. And so do we. If this story stayed with you, share it. Speak it aloud. Make space for the names that were almost lost. Someone always hears. Someone always needs to.